We had Jody with us last weekend, Jody Romero from Restoration, Los Angeles. And I don't want to just scoot on past what he shared over that weekend. So I want to just go through some of the things and some of the promptings I felt out of that time. There were two key questions that came out. And Jody, I believe, carries the mantle of an evangelist. And again, he talked about the fact that not everyone is an evangelist. That's an office in the scriptures of something you preach and it causes people to want to go and share their faith. But we are all called to evangelize. In other words, you don't have to be an evangelist to evangelize people, because evangelizing is simply sharing Jesus. And I love that he wanted to disarm that, but I think it's still something we carry, because when you say to people, hey, we're going to go share the gospel, we're going to invite people to church, we're going to go evangelize, people are like, oh, I'm not an evangelist. Well, yes, you are. Not the office of, but the call to. All of us are meant to share Jesus with everyone we can, everywhere we go. And it's meant to be simple. It's meant to be easy. It's meant to be this incredible joy we have because we've been saved and didn't deserve it. And we want to tell others how to be saved even if they don't deserve it, because none of us do. It's meant to be simple. It's meant to be sharing the greatest joy you have. Now, I love talking about my wife to others. I love talking about my boys because I love them. I celebrate them. They're part of the joy of my life. But to be honest, if I love doing that more than I love celebrating the one who actually saved me and enabled me to be able to step up to 30 years of marriage this year and to have two incredible sons because of his goodness, if I'm not celebrating him even above that, there's something that's out of whack. And we can say, well, Chris, there's a problem with you, and that may well be true. There are things I need to adjust. But it's also a reality that the things we need to do most are the things that are going to be hardest to do if the yes thing isn't dealt with. That was a big bite there, wasn't it? I'm just going to go into what I felt out of Jody's time, and there's much to it. Please, it's all up on the app and things you can listen in. I encourage you to do so. Two questions came out of the much that Jody shared. One of them is, and the overall question is there room at your table? And he posed that question for people. To me, that's the secondary question. The primary question is there room at your table for God? Not to sit equal with you, but to sit at the head of the table and to guide your life. Is there room for God? Because we can get so busy and so consumed with ourselves and life and everything around us that we forget the very reason we're here. You see, if we didn't have a task to do, God would have saved us and taken us to heaven. Okay, got one, got another, got another, got another. Let's just get them all out of there. Because we're saved, we're done, we're His. We already have a seat in heaven. It's waiting for us when this life ends. So why not take us home? There must be a reason. And the enemy and the world around us, the enemy being the devil, the world around us, and our flesh wants to get us to say, well, my purpose for being here is this life. My wife and my kids. And that is part of the privilege we have, but there's great purpose in that. And the overlying purpose of that is to share the gospel. To live this life so that others can see the light of Christ in a dark world. But the question that comes is there room for that in our lives? Because if there isn't, then what are we doing? And I know this battles all of our cultural stuff. You know, my wife, when we got married and everything, the beginnings, it's family first. Yeah. You know, in our nation, it's country first. Or it says God, country, all those slogans. But the reality is God's never really at the top of that priority scale. And if He isn't, then what are we doing? But the challenge in that is it means we got to adjust a whole lot of things in our lives. Doesn't necessarily mean He's going to make you change your job, where you live, any of those things, but He could. Is there room for Him at your table? Or does God get a little wedge? I mean, if you got a pie and God gets where's the wedge for you, God? Rest is mine. We're not living in the fullness of what God has for us. And I'm not telling you that if you shift everything over to making sure that it's what God wants, it's going to be easy. It may be difficult. But the value in what you do when you're doing what God made you to do changes people for eternity. And it fulfills the very reason you were created in the first place. To me, to live in what God called me to do is the greatest privilege I have. Part of that is I get to be husband to Cheryl. Part of that is I get to be dad to my boys. Part of that is I get the privilege to lead this group and whatever God has for us. And part of it for you is you have your family and you have your workplace and you have your neighborhood. That's all part and parcel of the call. But is there room for God in that? Or has He been maybe put in a separate table while you do your thing? The second question in there, is there room at our table for others? Is our life so full that we have no room for people? And it can seem like an odd thing because we're probably all around people all the time. Most at work, at school, wherever. But it's not a matter of posture. I mean, I can be close to Cheryl, but not be close to Cheryl. Proximity does not mean I'm engaging people.
Yes, very true.
It means that we have to take the privilege we have to make room for people in our lives who are already in our lives. But in our mindset, it has to change. Now, that does mean having people over for meals. It does mean going out to lunch with people. It does mean being deliberate in what we do when we're around people. But is there room for that? Have we made room for that? Or is our table full because we put so much else there that there's no room for what God's got planned? Are you with me? Does that make sense? It's a challenging thing. I'm challenged by it. Because there's a lot of things I love to do, want to do, all that, but I have to stop and say, okay, God, I've got my plan. But I don't want to run with my plan because I know where my plan led me before Christ, and I know even in Christ, my plan is always going to fall short. And the wonderful thing I find about God is when I begin to make room and make it all His, often He'll take the plans that I've had and make them far better than I ever could and use them in ways I never would have thought possible. Some of you look at me quite baffled. That's all right. I just felt for us, this challenge that Jody gave us, is there room at our table, is a heart thing and not a head thing. Because right now, everything I've said to you, I think if we walked out of here, checklists would all come out. Oh, yeah, well, this is not, I've got to change my priorities. I'm the worst sinner. I'm the worst person. And we just go right down the road of religious condemnation and either toss that thing out or live under the weight of how far we fall short. So please don't hear this in your head. We do have to make adjustments, but it has to be a heart thing that God can lead us through. So jump with me, if you would, over to Luke. We're going to go to Luke chapter 15 of Luke. Probably familiar to many of us, but I just feel like there's a heart to be caught here that Jody imparted, and I want to make sure we massage in to the foundations of us as a church. Jesus is speaking to the disciples, and the religious guys are around, and he's talking about the cost of being a disciple. If you want to follow me, you've got to basically lay down your life. I mean, he goes into very much of some of the things I just talked on. He talks about at the end of it, salt is good for seasoning, but if it loses its flavor, how do you make it salty again? Flavorless salt is good neither for the soil nor the manure pile. It's thrown away. And he's not saying we're useless. He's just saying we've got to have salt. There's got to be some value, some eternity to who we are. Otherwise, we don't have the value that we're meant to have. And then chapter 15 picks up. And I love this about Jesus because he just busts open all the religious ideas. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. And I used to take pride in being one of those notorious sinners. Notorious means you're well known for something. In this case, they were well known for being sinners. Jesus didn't surround himself with those who pretended to be followers of Christ. He surrounded himself with those who understood they were sinners and wanted something to change. This made the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Now, Jesus has just talked about us being salt, the giving up our lives, all these things, and the religious things in the others rose up right at that point. And so Jesus responds to their reaction to him being around those who actually need him by telling these three simple parables. Verse 3. So Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Now again, this is a culture of shepherds. So to them, the shepherds are going, well, that one got away, I guess. Got eaten by the wolves. I'm not going to leave my 99 to go after that one. That would be a foolish thing to do in the mathematics of this world. And Jesus confounds them with his next statement because it makes no sense to them practically. He says, won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness Not in the stable, not under the care of other shepherds, but in the wilderness, and go search for the one that is lost until he finds it. It's not an irresponsibility. It says, and when he found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. When he arrives, he will call together all his friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep. In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and have not strayed away. And again, understand, right now he is speaking to the religious people who are upset about the tax collectors and notorious sinners who are sitting with Jesus listening. He's trying to help them understand the heart of God is not the practical, the simple, the easy, the thing we can wrap our mind around. The heart of God is that we go and we find until we get that one that's been lost. There is a diligence to this faith that, friends, until we reach the lost around us, we don't give up. Because the response that is in here is not, there's some applause in heaven, oh great, one more came home. It says there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others. In other words, you religious guys, there is more rejoicing in heaven that these tax collectors and these sinners are sitting here with a chance to come into eternity than there is that you guys get together and do your religious gymnastics. Because you're already saved, they're not. And the heart of the Father is, I will go and leave heaven to come to earth to reach one. And when that one is saved, me and all of heaven and all of creation and all the angels and all the elders will not just bow and worship God, but they will celebrate that one came home. There is intrinsic value implied here. That every person is valuable. To the shepherd, the sheep that got away is probably started to drift away before. He's probably an annoying one of the sheep. He's probably one of those like, I have chased that thing down 10 times. Good riddance. God never gives up. There is an overcoming. There is a leaving what is known to go after the unknown. There is the leaving the practical to go after the impractical for the sake of one. Friends, this church was not planted so we could do practical things. Practically, we were pretty set in the north, and our things were practically in place. And to move down, move your house, move your family, move everything, all for this is an impractical thing. But if one can be saved, that's why we're here. But we can't let the enemy and that busyness rob us of the privilege of what we get to do. Is there room at the table of our lives to reach one? Goes on and he says, he's like, probably like, you guys still don't get this, I'm going to keep going. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. And the coins they're talking about here, there's a bit of debate as to what they represent. The drachma of the time was a day's wages. So in some senses, it's one day's wage. But with the ferocity with which she looks for this coin, it's probably leaning more toward when a woman got married, often there were things given by the family as heirlooms, things you just didn't get rid of. They were priceless. And often those things were in the way of coins. They belonged to someone, they were printed in someone and given over to the family. So this coin, again, more I think leans that way where she's lost a valuable coin, something that you show people when they come, something that when the husband's family comes, it's like, well, there's the coins you gave us. It's a display. It's an essential, important part of their lives. And so the fact that this is lost is not a little thing. It's not like, oh, I lost a day's wages. It's something that's irreplaceable. And it says, won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? Now, any of you who've cleaned your house, and I'm guilty of it, I will vacuum as long as I don't have to move anything. Get that? That's why you like vacuums that kind of go under stuff, So you're not like lifting and moving. But you get what you can see. And even if you're diligent, my wife's very thorough, no matter what, unless you start moving stuff out and getting to it, there's just stuff everywhere. And the implication here isn't that she just kind of looked around and go, yeah, I don't see it. and went on about her business. It says she swept the entire house. If you're going to sweep your house, you got to move the couch, you got to move the rug, you got to move the kids, you got to move the stuff. That's when you realize you got too much stuff everywhere. All of those things. So this is not an implication of a woman who just had a couple things. She lives lightly. This is a woman who has a household. She's cleared everything out to sweep to find this one coin. There is an urgency that is implied here. There is a desperation to find this lost coin. And when she finds it, she will call in her friends and neighbors and say, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. The heart here is not a matter of a coin or a matter of a house. I hope we understand that. He's giving practical examples because he wants people to understand what he's talking about. There is a desperation to find that coin. If the husband comes home, and again, I'm reading into it, but potentially if the husband comes home and it's like, "Well, where's the 10th coin?" I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? That was my father's coin. That has to be here. They're coming over in a week. I mean, the implications here is he's trying to help us understand in a real practical way the realities of the heart behind this. It would be a desperation in you to find that coin, to get it back in place before anybody comes home, before it's discovered it's missing. And then when you finally find it and get it in place, she goes and says, "Oh, you won't believe what happened. I lost that coin." "What? Your husband will be furious." "Well, we found it. I searched the house. I swept." And again, I'm simplifying, but he's doing that for them to understand. He's simplifying it down to something practical, but to understand the desperation, the hunger, the deliberateness, the urgency with which she searched. It doesn't say she took days. It says she swept, she worked, she desperately searched until she found that thing. And friends, we need to have that kind of a heart, that God heart for those who do not know Christ. For the one sinner that could repent and come to salvation. And I had this story in my head, and yesterday I had the privilege of being at Kansas University, and we're sitting with one of the main coaches. And from what I could tell, from what I could gather, he wasn't a Christian, a saved man, but he was a very honest guy from New York. We were able to just be brutally honest with each other. I love that about New Yorkers. Just a really good guy, investing in people. And, he said, "You guys are going to stay the night? Are you going to drive back now?" "Drive back. I got to preach in the morning." He's like, "Oh," and he got sparked up. Like, "Well, how do you pick what you preach?" And asked me some questions. And I just started telling him, where we're going through is the Bible, why God had us plant the church is to reach people in the area. And he's just looking at me. There was a hunger in him. He wasn't like, I was waiting for him to cut me off, honestly. Waiting for him to give me, "Oh, that's nice," and move on. But he sat the entire time and listened and had questions. And I saw in him a hunger for something more. Because this is a man of success. This is a man who is hired specifically, probably paid quite a bit of money for all that he does. And what a privilege. He had an office with an amazing view. All the stuff. Here's some dude with his son in a zip-up sweatshirt, hoping for a scholarship for our boy. And he's listening like I'm feeding him gold. That one sinner. Again, I don't know. I'm not implying I don't know where he stands in it. My gist was I don't think he's a follower of Christ, but he may be. But he matters to God. And we've got to use every opportunity, every platform to share what God is doing. For me, he opened up the door by asking, "Well, how do you feel?" "Oh, well, let me tell you." And I just rolled into it. And I loved it because it was freeing. It was just like, it's what I'm excited about. Why would I hold back? And yet there's that thing in you going, maybe he doesn't want to hear. Maybe he's not interested. Like I said, I was waiting for him to just cut me off. That would have been okay. I probably would have carried on anyway, just to finish what I was saying. But friends, we gotta understand the heart of God in this. In the same way as that woman who found this invaluable, priceless coin and got it and told her neighbors and rejoiced that she found it, that nothing's going to happen, no worries. There is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one precious sinner repents. Repenting is turning away from sin and the world and destruction and ungodliness and turning to Christ and being forgiven and saved for all eternity. That has to stir within us. Not a guilt trip, but just a heart that we want to see people know Christ as we get to know Him. Let me do my best to read this last story. It's wonderfully rich. Verse 11, he tells them one more story. Again, trying to reach them in different places. To illustrate the point further, Jesus, in order to drive the point home, really, Jesus told them this story. A man had two sons. Looks like there's a lot of men with 2 sons in the scriptures, right? The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. You know, for years you could read that and just be like, oh yeah, what a rude kid. But in the culture of the day, what Jesus just said, just with those 2 sentences, would be absolutely shocking. People there would stand up out of their seats and go, what? Because the implication here of this younger son, first of all, he's not the oldest son. He doesn't have rights to those things. He has an inheritance, but it's lesser than the oldest son. For him to say, I want my share of the estate is basically saying, I wish you were dead. Because he doesn't just get money. It's not just stuff. It's land that belonged to the family for generations. It's the future of what that would hold. It is his part of the family. You don't just take your inheritance. You say, I don't want anything to do with you. Your name, my family, this place, and the future and the responsibilities I'm supposed to have. I want out. Even in our day, we would have some words for someone like that. In that day, he should have been stoned to death. So that statement alone, I'm sure got certainly the religious guys stirred up. But then when the second part says, so his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. I'm sure that they were like, who is this guy? What, is he crazy? Why would you do that? That son, all the stuff in them riled up. But it starts to demonstrate the open-handed nature of the God we serve. Friends, he's not going to kidnap people to heaven. There is no purgatory. There is no second chance. This is it. It is the kindness of God that draws people to repentance, not the grasp of his religious hands. Verse 13, a few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land. Now understand, a few days later, he was given what they had. They didn't have a bunch of money in a thing that he gave him in a bank. He had land, property, assets. So what that meant is he had to sell everything quickly, which means he took the stuff that for generations had been given to him and just loosely said, here, buy this. I got to get out of here. Take this. Gave away family inheritance for probably pennies on the dollar of what it was worth. Can you imagine being the father, seeing your generations of inheritance, your name being tossed aside, given to neighbors? Imagine what the neighbors think. All those things that come into play in this culture. And it says, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. Went to this distant land and did it. About that time, as the money ran out, a great famine spread over the land, and he began to starve. Life's circumstances came. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him. And actually that word, hire him, is more bonded to him. He actually became almost like a bond slave to this guy. He had nothing. He just said, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'll be whoever you want me to be. And this person being a Gentile, I'm sure, and the son being still dressed in his Hebraic clothes and hair and all that, probably said, well, I know what I'm going to do with you. You Jews hate pigs, so you're going to feed my pigs. It was the ultimate insult to everything that was his heritage, everything that he actually was. So it says, and the man sent him in his field to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. The pods they feed pigs, humans can't eat. So it's not like he had a bunch of stuff that was left over. It was stuff for pigs. So he didn't even have food from that. There's nothing he could eat. No one looked after him. He was absolutely on his own. When he finally came to his senses, and I've preached on this many, many times, and as I continue to study it, just kind of unfolds more and more. What you'll see here is not a man who came to his senses in the sense he came to realize, I've screwed up, I need God, all that. He just came to realize everything he had was gone. And now what's he going to do? Because this is a manipulative, rude, selfish person who's done what he's done. He said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and I'm here dying of hunger. So I'm going to go to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. And again, I think there's room in here to take it different ways, but as I look at this and study it, it seems more like he's got a plan in mind. He's trying to figure out, how can I manipulate my way back in? Or I'll have some food and I'll be taken care of. I know I'm out of the family, but maybe I can at least work for my dad and have some food and be taken care of. He's got a plan in mind, a devised plan. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. And again, if we read that briefly, that can seem like a nice, clean little story. But again, understanding the culture of the day, and the people who are listening would get this right away. This is the elder of the home. From what we can tell, he's the oldest living person in this family. And so he doesn't run, because in order to run, he wears the longest robes and all that. He would have to take his robe, pull it up, which exposes his legs, which is an absolute embarrassment amongst that culture. Pick up those robe, kick off those sandals that cover his feet and bring respect, and run, which you're not supposed to do as an elder of a family. And to us, we're like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. In that culture, everything he did was the wrong thing. Everything he did denied all of the cultural, religious norms of that time for the sake of his son. So as he runs to him, I'm sure the son's coming. He's like, okay, yeah, I'm sorry for what I did. Make me a servant. He's got his little story in mind. And suddenly he sees his old dad running, holding up his robe, showing his legs, no sandals on, running as fast as he can, not only to get to the son, but to outrun the rest of the village that was coming to do what they call kazaza, which is, if you have done what he's done, you're out of the family, out of the village. They break a jar in front of you that represents the covenant with your family in this village between you and him. You are done. And if you ever try and come back in, they can stone you to death. You're out. So this wonderful little picture of this old man running to his son there's more to it. So by now, these religious people who are already upset are infuriated of this story of this Jewish elder man who is pulling up his robe, running toward his son, kicking off his sandals, not allowing the kazaza of the day to be done to get this son who deserves punishment to get out. But because the father humiliates himself in the eyes of all those around him for the sake of his son, he saves his son from the humiliation and the separation that should have been acted on him. You see, the representation, he's trying to help these religious people understand God's heart is not that we continue to go down this road and this course and be separated. His heart is to reunite us with him, to restore broken relationship. And his son said to him, Father, and notice here, the son never gets to his whole little spiel about, well, I'll be a servant and I'll work here and I'll work here, because he's been confronted not with a father who's enraged, which he should have been, or a people ready to cast him out. He's been confronted with a father who has blown his mind and confronted him with kindness. It's not that the father gave away the sin, it's the father took the humiliation on himself. And he said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. There we see true humility, because the kindness of the father in the midst of what the son deserved hit him. Friends, it's what saved us. It wasn't God pointing out our constant faults. We knew them. We ran from them. It was God's grace pointing to that grace that could save us, that saved us. And then the father's response, but the father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring on his finger, and we know my son is home. The son is restored. This unworthy son is a son again. This son that doesn't even, not just be a servant, but can't even come in the village of his birth and his ancestry, is now a son again, full inheritance, everything back to him because of the grace of God. But there's one more son. And to be honest, I've glossed over, tried to figure it out, tried to label it just under religion, but there is more to this as there is in the Scriptures. Verse 25, meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard the music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants, what's going on? Your brother's back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We're celebrating because of his safe return. And again, I always picked up from that he was irritated, he was annoyed, this brother blew the inheritance, it was partially his. But the eldest son in this Jewish Hebraic family, his job was to make sure that between the father and the younger sons and grandkids, there was no division. His actual job, his role, was to keep the family together. So this older son was so busy working and doing his thing that when the youngest son came to the father, that's where the older son should have come in and brought reconciliation. But he was so distracted from what he was supposed to be doing by paying the bills and doing all those things, he missed this opportunity to keep his younger brother from going off the rails. And now that the younger brother's come back, he's still so busy working. Not only did he not do the job of reconciliation, he doesn't even know what's happening. Friends, we cannot become like the older brother and become so busy with other things that we forget the privilege we have to keep the family together, to reconcile the lost sons, the lost daughters, and be the ones who bring them back to the Father. The Father's done His work. Our job is to keep that message of reconciliation going. Share it with others. Reach others. It says the older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him. But he replied, "All these years I've slaved for you." And clearly he was not slaving. "And never once refused to do a single thing that you told me to do. And in all that time you've never even given me one young goat for a feast with my friends." His perspective of what he got to do was wrong. Because his perspective was this was a task that I have to do for my Father, instead of a privilege that I get to do with my loving Father. And friends, for us, our Christianity, our privilege to evangelize, to share our faith, has to move from being, "I've slaved for you all these years, I can't wait to get to heaven." Not that we usually have that kind of an attitude to it. But it's not we do stuff for God. We get to do this with Him. We get the privilege to share the message of a Father who would humiliate Himself to take humiliation from us, who would pay the price for our sins so that we didn't have to. The older brother had the wrong idea of the Father and what He did and what He served. And Jesus is trying to undo that in these religious guys who have this mindset of we have to do this and we have to do that. Get the grunt out of your religion. Get the religion out of your life. And join in the privilege we get to do with the Father. The Father says, the Father's response to this irritated, frustrated son is, I want to read it as is. His father said to him, "Look, dear son." Because the older son says, "This son of yours," he even disowns him. Friends, those lost people out there are our brothers and sisters. They're just lost. No matter who they are, no matter what color they are, no matter what background they have, they are our lost family. We cannot disown them anymore. The church has been guilty of that too long. Well, they're not white, they're not Asian, they're not black, they are lost brothers and sisters that need to know about this Father that loves them. And his father's response wasn't to rebuke him, wasn't to say, "You lazy, wicked guy, you get out of here." It wasn't any of those things. His response was, "Look, dear son, you've always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, and he's now found." Our heart attitude has to be, we get to do this with our Father, and there are lost ones that need room at our table. It comes back to that question, is there room at our table for God and for His purposes and for the lost around us? How do we reach the lost? Have a meal and invite them over. And through that relationship and friendship, share what God's done in your life and hear what's happening in theirs. And through that relationship, then, as they come to know Christ, invite them to join you in fellowship in these times. Because you're not inviting them to church when they come here. You're inviting them to church when you invite them to your table, when you invite them for coffee, when you go and listen to what they're facing and you pray for them and you love on them and you go up to their room and they're battling those things. Celine shared a story of someone who just was facing incredible things. She went to her house, went up to her room, and just shared the love of Christ with her. We've got to be the go and get and find and seek and be desperate and sweep the house until implies until. Not until I'm tired or until I run out of time or until I'm too busy, but until they're found. Keep asking, keep praying, keep going. I was going to finish with this scripture, speaking it over us. 2 Corinthians verse 5. I'll pick up in verse 20. It's just 2 verses. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making His appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, "Come back to God." For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with God through Christ. Friends, we have a ministry not of church, not of religion, but of reconciliation. The Father can't wait. He's looking and waiting for the sons and daughters to come home. He will carry their humiliation. He will run as they run out the excuses and all the reasons why they don't deserve His love and His care. He will ignore that and embrace them, take their humiliation upon Himself, put the ring that they don't deserve on their finger and the robe of royalty on them, and welcome them home. But it's got to begin in our lives and at our table. Room for God and room for them. That's the heart of what I felt God was depositing in us last week and what I believe has to be at the heart of this church as we move forward.